So this podcast is called Being Better, and it's all about being and being better, essentially taking ownership of your life and living it as well as you possibly can. And life can be pretty tough at times. Even when you have security, a regular income, a job that you go to every day, life can be pretty tough. And I think we're finding this out now more than ever with COVID-19. But I've always wondered what it took to kind of make a success of your life on your own terms by doing your own thing. What kind of person in their right mind, for example, would decide not to go with a kind of tried and trusted way of getting a job, getting that regular income, getting money automatically paid into a pension, for example? What kind of person would decide to do their own thing? I've tried freelancing. I did it for 10 years, and it is tough, man. It is tough to make a living. So I've always wondered what it is that helps people, or what thing is up here that helps people get over those internal blocks and make a go of it, overcome the fear, and really push themselves to succeed. But then what about running an ethical business? As if life isn't hard enough already, you make it harder by going it alone, setting up your own organization, your own business, but then trying to do it as properly as you possibly can, ethically. Man, you are not making things easy for yourself. So, how do you keep the momentum going? How do you keep the faith and keep turning up day after day? Now, I've struggled, and I am a middle-class white guy. Literally, the world is designed for people who look like me. So what if you're not a middle-class white guy? What if you're a woman, for example? What if you're not white? Basically, there are biases, there are systems that have been designed to exclude you from succeeding, sometimes from even taking part. And we've seen this recently. It's been made more obvious than ever through the Black Lives Matter movement, through the protests that we've been seeing all over the world. And this conversation needs to keep going, But as I have seen from friends of mine who don't look like me, it is exhausting when the burden of trying to explain this thing is placed upon the people who have to live with it every day. So, why should women have to explain to men why feminism is important? Why should black people have to explain to white people why equality is important? And this was driven home to me more than ever in this conversation that I had with Kalkidan Legesse. She is the founder of Sancho's, which is an ethical fashion business based down in Exeter in the UK. And she has spoken quite a lot about racism in fashion. Basically, we have Western companies exploiting cheap labour in other countries. We get our products come from Bangladesh, for example, where working conditions are not great, where pollution from the fashion industry possibly has its worst impact. And so there's this whole supply chain issue where people who are not as well off, who don't look like people like me, are exploited. And during COVID-19, this has become even worse. So you have these big companies cancelling orders, huge orders, because the demand is no longer there, and not honouring the payments to these suppliers in these other countries. And what's happening is that people are losing their jobs. People are losing their livelihoods when they need them the most. And this is essentially racism in one form or another. Racism doesn't just come out in the form of white supremacy. It comes out in the way that our system is biased towards people who look like me and against people who don't look like me. And it comes out in the way we even speak to each other. It's ingrained in our culture. And it's a really difficult thing to kind of talk about sensitively. You've seen lots of things like the Royal Mail painting post boxes black to represent to honour Black History Month, and essentially that is blackface for post boxes. And I'm a little bit nervous about having these conversations because I have no cultural frame of reference. You hear people talking about white fragility, white guilt, white saviour syndrome, and it's a bit of I don't want to come across as any of those things, if I'm honest. So I've kind of avoided the conversations as much as possible. I've avoided kind of trying to have those conversations where I can. But I thought it was time to change that. And so in this conversation I have with Kalkidan, who graciously gave up her time to talk about her business and running an ethical business, and also racism, day-to-day racism in fashion and elsewhere, I rather clumsily went through it and approached it, but I learned a lot from it. I learned this kind of this burden of having to educate people should not be placed on the people who have experienced this kind of bias day to day. So it's up to people who look like me to teach ourselves. We need to read the books, we need to find out more, read up on the history, and it's certainly something that I've kind of made the excuse I've not had time to do it, but I'm going to have to make time because it's part of my kind of cultural responsibility. We're not living in days anymore where you can make sensitive jokes, where you can get away with deciding what people are like based on the colour of their skin. We're moving forward now, and if we want to progress, we need to take on that burden of responsibility ourselves. So here I am, giving it a go. I'm not very politically literate. I'm not very kind of culturally literate, but I thought I would give it my best shot. So here I am having a conversation with the very wise and astute Kalkidan Legesse of Sancho's, based down in Exeter. If you want to find out more about Sancho's and take a look at their clothing range, you can find them at www.sancho'sshop.com, and they're also on Instagram. Wow Sancho is the handle. I'll put all of this in the show notes, and it'll also be at the end of the podcast as well. All right, enjoy this conversation. I hope you learn from it as much as I did. Cheers. So Kalkidan Legesse, thank you so much for taking the time. I wanted to speak to you for a while now because you have kind of created your own business, and this podcast is all about taking ownership of your life and overcoming those internal obstacles that kind of prevent people from doing their own thing and fulfilling their potential. And you've gone down a very it's not an easy route. You've gone into fashion, which is a very crowded place. But not only that, you've gone into ethical fashion. So you run a shop called Sancho's, which has a physical store in Bristol, and you also sell online. And it's ethical fashion. And as if you couldn't make it any harder for yourself, why did you decide to go down this route? What made it attractive to you?
I'd hope that that's quite clear, given the compounding crises we live in at the moment. Was that the ICC gave us 11 years till climate Armageddon.
Yep.
Of course, global poverty, although it's shrinking, it's still, people are suffering from it. That's why it's ethical. I've been thinking a lot about the term ethical recently, which is what I was thinking about walking to work this morning. I think it's so easily freeloaded upon that perhaps our definition of what we're doing needs to be more accurate, so that it's easier for consumers to kind of understand. But ultimately, I think that I've always, I think I belong to a generation, in fact, that is very clear that the work that I do, how I choose to spend my life, should align with my values. And I think my values are only a natural response to the context in which we all live. And I think you can't do anything now without considering what the wider impacts of what you do is. And Sancho's is ethical because businesses like ours that buy and sell clothing create a lot of third-party problems, whether that's in the underpayment of garment workers or the enslavement of garment workers, or that's in the pollution caused by dyes and products, and all of these costs. Someone needs to be accountable for them, and I guess like our business and others like it are trying to spread that accountability more equitably. So not asking the people at, the earlier stages of production, the people with the least kind of bargaining power, to take on all the responsibility of those third party costs, and actually saying maybe we will, maybe our customers will as well. And that's how the business works. And I think every business should work just like that, particularly if we want to see some of the kind of shared challenges that we have as a society, so environmental challenges or social challenges, things that require kind of collective action, if we want to see them managed well. I think all of the different aspects of society, including business, need to kind of include them in their decision making and in their operational plans and everything. So yeah, that's my answer. I just would also say, Chris, the shop's based in Exeter.
Yeah.
So
sorry. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned aligning with your values, and I've kind of done some training in life coaching, and one of the key things to finding success is to do something that is aligned with your values. And I guess this is a challenge when you are a small business with high overheads, and you're taking the brunt of all the costs of everything you do kind of yourself, really, in a way. Whereas bigger organizations have much more flexibility to take these risks than you might do. But at the same time, they don't necessarily have values because they're a big corporate behemoth. They might not have the personal values that you have, so they don't have the drive to take on that responsibility necessarily. So does it become about market forces? Do you have to kind of persuade people that they have to put pressure on the brands in order to encourage them to act more ethically in the way they source their, throughout their supply chain, the way they treat their suppliers and further down the chain?
Yes, absolutely. I think if consumers have any power, it's the power to kind of change demand, right? And that is hugely impactful. A really good recent example of that. Are you allowed to name specific companies, or would you like me to be vague?
Do whatever you like. Anything goes. That's cool.
Well, in June, it was reported that Boohoo PLC was using garment workers in Leicester who are earning £3.15 an hour, something like that, much lower than the national legal minimum wage. And that was kind of very thoroughly campaigned against by lots of people who are essentially just online activists.
Yeah.
But very impactful. And the consequence of that for Boohoo was a sustained drop in their share price.
Oh wow.
Up to 40%, lower than what it was. And that has resulted in Boohoo re-engaging with the topic and recommitting to increase payment to garment workers. And basically, I think what that does to a company is, it only works, I think, if it affects the company's bottom line, like this campaigning. I don't think it works if there's no risk for the company. But when there is a risk for the company, I think it makes them kind of wake up to the real consequences of long-term mismanagement of their supply chains. So yes, I do think campaigning has a really meaningful impact. I think that's a really good example of that this year. But I would also say that I think the thing about big business is that the shareholders and stakeholders rarely belong to the same group. So actions which are in the interest of shareholders, which might include lowering costs or pollutive practices that can help lower unit prices, might be at the expense of stakeholders. So I think what big business needs to become is kind of a fairer distribution of power between stakeholders and shareholders. And I hope that isn't too abstract. I mean, obviously it's not very abstract, but I hope that isn't avoiding your question. But I think now that we have seen how easy it is for companies to jump on the bandwagon of ethical greenwash or blackwash or wokewash, I think it's really important for us to learn critical means of assessing whether or not they're doing what we need them to do. And it's easier to hold me accountable because there's 6 of us at Sancho, so anybody can walk in and hold me accountable for anything, to be honest. It's much harder to hold accountable the shareholders of H&M. And I think because of that we need to kind of imagine ways in which we might, and I think one of the big problems is this like a business structure in fashion which has become really efficient and really successful, which is taking lots of value and directing it to a very small number of people who aren't at all associated with the costs of that value creation, and then therefore are comfortable with damaging the environment or other people's lives because ultimately it bears no consequence to them. But there are different models of business. I think there are ways in which that can be improved in the future.
That was a very good answer. And I mean, it is such a complex thing, and it is about kind of hitting people where it is important to them. So, I mean, for someone like you who is very passionate about this, that's going to be it's, again, in alignment with your values. So it's about the ethical and the moral stance. But for other people, it might be about their profits. It might be about kind of the reason they're involved in the first place. What is their skin in the game, and how can you impact that? Is there a danger, though, that when you start to do this, it's going to ultimately impact the pockets of the consumer? Because I remember Lucy Siegel. I mean, you're probably aware of Lucy Siegel and her writing about fast fashion and stuff like that. And she said she became empowered about this topic when she saw someone coming out of Primark one day with a bag full of clothes, and the bag broke and all the clothes fell on the floor and fell into a puddle on the floor. And the clothes were of such low value that they just left them there and walked off because it had been so cheap in the first place. But, people still need to clothe themselves. They still need to, there is this kind of inequality between the people who have the most and the people who have the least. And people still need affordable fashion. Are you going to make it, is it going to ultimately impact people who are not going to be able to afford clothes because the prices are going up and that kind of thing? Who should be paying for all of this?
I think another kind of mental rigorousness we all need is a means to ask for action in relation to somebody's power, privilege or capacity. I think perhaps there's already a term for that, but I think whenever we're asking for change in society, you ask it in direct relation to the capacity an individual or an organization has for change. So I wouldn't expect the same thing from a working class family as I would from a middle class family, as I would from an upper class family. I think that needs to be the starting point for sure. And then I think the fear of ethical fashion being far too expensive, I think that's a bit of a dated perspective because, the cheapest thing and the most sustainable choice are the clothes you already own, and they don't need to cost you anything, right? They're in your wardrobe or in your mum's wardrobe or whatever, right? And then the next group of products is secondhand clothes from charity shops or from Depop if you're 18 and cool. And those are all, much less expensive than an ethical fashion brand. So I think there are different access points. One thing we do at Sancho's to just kind of play our role in that is we have a collection of products we offer in the transparent pricing model. So we tier our prices and we allow the customer to choose what they want to pay for it. And the objective there is that we just illustrate very clearly that the markups that go into our products are there to help sustain us as a business. They're not arbitrary, and some people will be able to afford those markups and some people won't. So one thing that we could do is use the amount earned from the people who can afford it to provide cheaper clothes to people who can't afford it, and they can still be ethical just without a markup in. And that's been really successful. And I think there are so many different initiatives that try to make ethical fashion more inexpensive, from like renting or buying secondhand or mending classes or whatever, that I would hope that most people could access it in some way. And I would also just say that I think the cost argument is another one perpetuated by fast fashion companies. If we go back to Boohoo, which, I don't actually have anything against like them specifically, but I spent a lot of time reading their reports in June, and they use the language of the democratization of fashion to justify low prices, which ultimately led to people in the UK earning less than the legal minimum wage. And their argument is, if they weren't making cheaper clothes, then fashion would be elitist. But the truth is, their expectation from their customer isn't that their customer won't spend increasing amounts from them. Their goal is to increase spend over time. So they might not be concerned by unit price, but they are concerned that the customer spends as much as possible with them. And I think if part of their operations is to drive sales, then they can't also say that their goal is to reduce costs for their consumers. It's incongruous. It doesn't make sense. And yeah, I think it's an argument used to kind of make ethical fashion seem like a ridiculous, like liberal, dreamy. I had a friend who would call it like yogurt weavery thing. I it's a nice term.
Well, you hear it in politics as well. Whenever anyone comes up with some grand idea that will benefit lots and lots of people, there's always this argument, yeah, but who's going to pay for it? And then all of a sudden, that's it. It's dead in the water. That conversation's over because no one can pay for it. But then there are other things where there's a bottomless amount of money available for it. And, you have to wonder, like, how much of what we know and what we believe about pretty much everything is actually PR, is actually kind of, the result of, campaigns to make some things seem much less toxic perhaps than they are, and other things much more, there's, in America at the moment, there's a big kind of fight against socialism, because people think about socialism in terms of very, the awful numbers of deaths in Russia after the Second World War, these kind of things. And they see socialism as evil, but they don't realize that, paying taxes to drive your car on the road is essentially socialism. And there's this whole kind of, it's all optics and all of this kind of thing. So how could we believe even what we think ourselves about kind of what we're being told about fashion and all of this kind of stuff? I mean, do we have to go to great lengths to try and dig under the surface ourselves, or do we, a lot of people don't have the energy. How do you kind of motivate yourself to be more ethical in this way?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to use our collective means, right? I think that this is what I was saying about, this conversation I was having in my head this morning, is if ethicalness can't be like a fixed point. It has to be a process of like learning and adjusting and adapting and changing new information to try to like, be better, right? Whatever that parameters of that are.
Yeah.
I would say, like, I don't know, I think we all just need to kind of take responsibility for the impact that our lives have in appropriate ways, and that might require us to learn more things and be a bit more critical and reflective about choices we make or have made. And yeah, I would say that that would be a good thing for us individually and for society. If we're talking about it from a mindfulness and like leadership and self-leadership perspective, I think one of the best ways in which we can kind of direct our lives is by practicing reflection and learning and growth into our choices. So in the case of fashion, it could be in what we choose to consume or promote or read or whatever. But I think that skill carries so well into other choices that we make in our lives, right? I think ultimately it helps us take control of our lives and the impact that we have in the world, and that's really positive.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think all of this stuff is very much about, do we surrender to the cheapest and easiest option, or do we find the kind of motivation in ourselves to actually be better, to stand for something? And maybe, you were talking about aligning with your values. Again, it comes back to this. It's like, who do I want to be? Do I want to be someone who is part of the problem, or do I want to be, at least trying to contribute to some sort of solution here? I mean, when you were setting up Sancho's, were there ever times where you thought, I'm making this incredibly difficult for myself? Could I not just sell, just buy cheap stuff from a wholesaler and sell it at a decent markup, and not even touch this whole kind of trying to be good and doing the right thing kind of thing, and just have a clothes store and make some money?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, in fact, I'm faced with that question weekly as I reorder stock for the shop. All the time. It's really challenging. Like, I think because I try to make good decisions, right, the capital G, I've got to always be thoughtful as to what that means, and that means I'm like often failing on that. Like, so I'm really conscious of the choices that I've made that aren't ethical, or aren't the most ethical version of that choice. I don't know if I should specify to you,
No, that's okay.
and that's like making life harder for myself, but no, it's a real struggle. And I think it does affect our bottom line, like, frankly. I don't think it has to, and it's not necessary that every ethical business model needs to be more expensive than its counterpart. I think, it's just we're in a specific industry that behaves a specific way. But, I think that there's enough value here to sustain me and my team and grow, and it's opened so much other value in my life, like having this business.
Yeah.
So some of those costs are like worthwhile, and then also I do think, like, over time regulations will change, and suddenly, like, everybody will be in the same boat, like, cost wise, and that will offer different types of opportunities for businesses that are already positioned kind of in that ethical sphere.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way kind of commercialism works at the moment is that it has to be, in order for us to have affordable electronics, for example, or PlayStations, these massively complex devices, or massively kind of engineered clothes, or whatever it is, in our homes at affordable prices. There has to be some sort of not exploitation necessarily, but you're basically taking advantage of people who don't have the kind of same economic kind of advantages that we have. So our iPhones are made in China, they're mass produced in factories in China, who pay their employees a lot less. We're getting our clothes from Bangladesh, from people who work in factories that don't have the kind of same health and safety rules that are supposedly requirements in the UK. And it's those kind of trade-offs. There must be some kind of awareness when you're buying something on Amazon or wherever it is, that is it's a really good deal, and you have to kind of think to yourself, this is almost too good to be true. And you were talking about taking responsibility. That must be, it's almost like a burden, I suppose, when you're trying to be ethical and you're trying to live according to your values, and having high values, and holding yourself to these high values. It's got to be wearing, because you're kind of saying to yourself, I run my business ethically, I have to live ethically. Where am I buying my food? How am I living? Where's my electricity coming from? Do you ever just think, oh goodness me, just like, I just want to go and get a Big Mac and just take a break from all of this?
Yeah, I eat I eat McDonald's. I think it's, once again, I think it's really important to your listeners that like, I don't describe ethical fashion as like burdensome, or ethical business as burdensome. I don't think it is in the slightest, actually. It's a joy. It offers different forms of like creativity and creation and design and communications, that are very fulfilling, actually. And I think in that way, you know, it's definitely a joy. I'm definitely not holistically ethical in the slightest. I don't think anyone is. And I think when I was saying, you know, we need to have the kind of the rigor of expecting things from people in relation to their power or privilege, I think that you know, that applies here as well, and also it applies to how we treat ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so much I can do or say or create or whatever, so I can't expect more of myself than is possible. It's also very impractical. It's a really easy way to burn out, to just kind of expect yourself to do more than that's reasonable. But that doesn't mean we can't hold other people to account.
Yeah.
And you know, let's hold people or corporations or governments to account in relation to, you know, the resources they have access to and to the knowledge they have access to. Yeah, so I think it's, and also I think there's just a general kind of problem or challenge describing any of this as ethics, because there's a lot of like practical reasons why you would choose to think about third-party costs to your business operations, right? So, like, you know, climate change is the perfect example. If we use materials in a way that land can't sustain them, then we'll run out of the supply. So it makes sense for us to find sustainable means to, you know, get raw materials out of the ground, and the same with energy. And in terms of human labor, I think if we continue to treat people in developing countries isn't the right word, but in kind of the global south or the global east or China, manufacturing in China, we continue to treat all of that human capital as though its only value is in like one repeat task output that should be as minimally paid as possible. Like, I think we're all losing opportunities for development, innovation, growth, like yeah, so I think there's lots of reasons why you would choose to have kind of a bigger picture approach to running your business. And I think there are companies who want that. I think Unilever and Danone, they're really great examples of huge companies who are investing a lot into the development of their human capital or their manufacturing processes. Like, not enough, they're not doing enough, and I'm not a champion of them, but I think there is a growing wave of decision makers within huge organizations who actually don't want to be entrepreneurs. Like, they don't want to work for themselves, they don't want to run small businesses in, like, you know, in small towns. They want to work within big organizations, but they also want to start aligning that work with their values. And I think that will bring reward rather than cost over time.
Yeah, and I think it will bring reward for everyone over time, not just personally, but globally. In terms of, so you are now. I'm probably going to be very clumsy at this. So I've been trying to have since the Black Lives Matter movement started up, the recent startup of all of this, where it's made and continues to make headline news. I've been trying to get my head around kind of where I am in all of this as a middle class white man, who essentially people who look like me are actually part of the big problem we're facing right now, and I'm trying to kind of have conversations about it. But the problem is I'm quite clumsy at this kind of thing. So I apologize now if any of this doesn't sound right or any of these questions seem really daft. But you are a woman of color. So you have two things almost going against you that I don't have. So you're a woman, and you are also not white like me. And society is kind of geared up for people who look like me. You know, and even I find life to be incredibly hard sometimes. But you're going out there, you're starting a business, you are a woman of color. Have you found any obstacles based on those perspectives that you might not have might not have experienced if you were someone like me trying to do the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess now I would describe myself as black, just
Yeah.
talking about clumsiness. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
not that you weren't clumsy at all, but just I'm Ethiopian, and I am a woman. That's true. Born a woman. So yeah, obstacles. I think that the reality of being a person of color or being a woman or having any kind of what's described as a minority status, but of course belongs to the global majority, is that people carry very heavy prejudices about who you are, what you're capable of, what you know, what value you can add, your worth, essentially. And even the people who are trying their best to support you or are in fact tasked with the role of supporting you, so your educators or your healthcare providers or your employers, they also hold these biases which essentially value your life less than your white peers or your male peers. As a woman, as a black woman, you know, my experience could be described as an intersectional experience between the effects of racism and misogyny, where in most circumstances, a kind of interplay of both of these prejudices will be affecting interpersonal relationships that I have with, you know, whoever that relationship is with. And yeah, that brings up lots of obstacles from, you know, not getting the same level of opportunity. A very clear obstacle is, you know, I'm not starting from the same position as my white male peers in a lot of the things that I've done ever in my life. And then
No, I think I'm losing.
what you do today, which is rooted in their prejudice. Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. You've come back now. That's okay.
But so their microaggressions might be rooted in their prejudice, but they might themselves not be aware of that. So you're often having to navigate a lot of people's inexperience and ignorance. And the most challenging thing about it is that it's everywhere and it's every day. And it's not a factor of your like personhood. Like I think one of the main kind of privileges of a white man is oftentimes like you're taken at your word or taken at your behavior. Like people will wait to see what you do or say before claiming to know you.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, people often assume less of me until they know better. And then once they know better, they often struggle with understanding that their original perspective was rooted in racism or misogyny. So yeah, it is really challenging. I think since June, since George Floyd was murdered and since Black Lives Matter became, it's really, really like just crazy what's happened this summer, where suddenly like white people seem to have kind of chosen that now's the time to understand that race plays a role in our society, whereas before I think it was very much seen as a, you know, a non thing or something very minor or something that was to be dealt with within the realm of, you know, blackness, as opposed to, you know, the interaction between whiteness and blackness. But I think since then, like, what's been interesting is, I don't know, just so many things. One thing that really annoys me is the, you know, having to kind of be both the person who experiences like racial based discrimination and also educates on that.
Yeah.
And it's I could talk about this for ages, Chris. I don't know exactly what you want me
No,
to
no,
say,
that's fine. It's
but
okay.
one of the decisions like I need to make as a like Black woman is, do I play the role of guiding my white peers and white people who have more power than me, into a more inclusionary, racially equal space, often at my own expense, so
Yeah.
in my own time and with my own resources,
Your own energy.
and
Yeah.
my own energy? Or do I play the role of just observer of what's happening with the hope that it will move in the right direction, at lower expense to myself, but with a greater consequence of things might not go right? And that's just a constant question that me and my friends, my Black female friends, this is the thing that really I think we are always talking about, because you know, it's really hard to watch as people learn about something that you've experienced like all your life, and like watch them come to each kind of new understanding with a level of naivety which was afforded to them by their privilege, whilst you carry the weight of the experience and have had to kind of navigate it and come up regardless of it. That's a really like challenging thing to do. So oftentimes it's easier not to do anything,
Yeah.
but then the consequences of not doing anything are often worse. So yeah. But on the, you know, but also I do want to say, like, I love, obviously being a Black woman is awesome. Like, I love it. You know, I've had a really great life, and, you know, really great friends and really great family. And I think that I've been afforded so much privilege myself. You know, my family, they came from a very, very poor background in Ethiopia. And if one compares my life to my father's, who was orphaned due to civil war, you know, like it's incomparable. So um, I'm definitely happy to be
Yeah.
exactly who I am. Yeah.
But I mean, I'm amazed, and like you say, it's like I do feel guilty, culturally as a kind of a white man, but also guilty that I'm putting this burden upon my friends, my Black friends, to try and educate me. You know, I'm trying to make some of the effort, and I do. You know, it's a bit of a tightrope, and especially when you realize that all the institutions, you know, you're talking yourself about trying to be as ethical as you can and live to your own values. But all of the in the UK, a lot of the institutions that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, the banks, you know, even the most uh, supposedly ethical companies we're dealing with, they've borrowed money from, or they're involved with suppliers who have their roots in colonial Britain. So it's almost like there is this kind of this taintedness to everything we do. We can't escape this kind of inherent exploitation of our history. It's in the architecture of our buildings. It's in, you know, the way we source our clothes. I mean, it's it's a bit of a minefield, especially for someone who is naive and clumsy like me, trying to figure out how best to, you know, be an ally, especially when I was reading your article in the Guardian, and then reading about COVID-19 as well. Is going to have terrible effects for you know, whole families, thousands of families who in places like Myanmar, who are going to be without jobs because their factories are going to close down because, you know, these big businesses are not following through on their orders for fashion and for clothes. And it's, you know, it's in almost everything we touch. There's this kind of institutionalized systemic racism almost. And I mean, do we have to, does our life have to become a protest for what's right? Do we have to,
I
you know,
think
do we
so.
have to walk away from all of these kind of organizations and demand something better?
Um, I think that no, I think so. I think our lives do need to be a call for change, and I think the choices we make need to be fully comprehensive of their consequences. I don't know, like, I can't imagine what it's like to be you.
Yeah, and vice versa as well. It's
at this stage of kind of questioning how things have come to be the way they are and whether or not that's fair. It says my internet's unstable. I'm just trying to think like what to say. It's not inevitable that the what we experience in society needs to be based on exploitation. I think there are lots of different examples of supply chains or institutional organizations or rhetoric that show us how we can at once deal with horrors in our history but imagine a better future for our present. Like, I mean, I don't know much about Germany, but I do spend quite a lot of time in Berlin, and I think one thing that has always been really apparent to me was that the nature in which like German society deals with its history, comparably to the way British society deals with its history, is just completely, black and white. They're on different ends of the spectrum. Britain will glorify, the horrors of both the slave trade, in keeping. My local museum has whips that were used to punish slaves, like mislabeled for view on their collection, and have had that for years. Yeah. The way the British look at their history, I think it centers the British experience, and it centers this idea of like moral, intellectual, technological superiority over the rest of the world, which I would hope has been challenged in different ways now. But that isn't true of every state. Like, I think Germany's a great example of how you can at once hold space for the realities of history and also imagine a more inclusive future. But I'm not Jewish, so yeah. Perhaps I'm not understanding the areas for improvement or growth or whatever. But yeah, that's from my perspective. So no, I would say it's definitely possible, and I think we have to kind of stay in that position of hope. And then the other thing I think is I listen to Michelle Obama a lot, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think, who obviously recently passed. She has a quote which goes, fight for the things you believe in, but do it in a way that motivates others to join you. And I think that's it, really. Of course, it would be great to see radical change, and we have to be prepared to fight for radical change, but the process might not be as swift as we can imagine it. But that doesn't mean that we should kind of give up on it or, change our goals or be demotivated. I think we just need to kind of keep pushing forward. And there are plenty of fashion supply chains now that aren't reliant on slavery at all. So that there is an alternative to that, for sure. And I'm sure in every industry there's both like a good and bad way. And I guess it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, is it just putting too much burden on individuals to have to be so conscious of everything that they do and every decision that they make? And I think we all know that the answer is yes, like people do have to make those choices, but also if businesses don't change and if government don't legislate for that change, then it's very easily going to be not as impactful as it otherwise would be. So we need to kind of ask for both. Yeah. And I think we are. So yeah, I think I hope that will be okay. Yes.
Do you think, I was going to say, I mean, a lot of this is very, trying to live a kind of a life, your own life to high standards. Life is hard anyway. Trying to live life to high standards, it can sound pretty heavy going, especially when you're having conversations like this, and you feel like the burden of kind of do the right thing and explaining yourself to people is just it's exhausting. But do you think it can be a joyful experience? I mean, you work in fashion, you're dealing with independent suppliers. I mean, there must be a great creative element in what you're doing, and this kind of life that you're building for yourself. Do you think having a higher purpose can be a joyful experience as well as a kind of heavily responsible experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is like the freedom to kind of just enjoy our everyday, and the small things that we do, you know. And in my day-to-day life, I get to look at beautiful fabrics, and I get to look at designs and think about how best to kind of organize a photo shoot, and
Yeah.
if I can think of something funny to say, and you know, all of these things that, you know, very light and very joyful. And I would hope that everyone can find ways to you know, find things to enjoy in their lives. I actually think I think that this feeling of burdened weight
Yeah.
is a function of like white privilege, actually. I think this is something I'm still kind of observing to
Yeah.
kind of reach a final conclusion on, but I think that it's easier to be like both a victim of the change that's needed, to feel burdened by it, and to feel like, oh gosh, like, there's nothing I can do, or this is too big for me, or those people have so much power, and how terrible did it have, like all of these, you know, if I make, these are the kind of things that people will comment a lot on my posts online or in articles I write or whatever, or contact me to say this huge feeling of overwhelmedness about what's
Yeah.
happening. And I think what that comes from is a wish to kind of evade responsibility and to indulge in a sense of manufactured loss. And I don't think everybody responds to these challenges in the same way. Like, I think, you know, we can take example like zero waste living and like plastic free living. Like, billions of people around the world use minuscule amounts of like single-use plastic in their day-to-day life. So they will go to their local markets to pick up fruits and vegetables. They will fill up oil in jerry cans. I'm not saying it's like the most efficient way for them to live, but they will do it because they just need to do it. But for us here to change our shopping habits, it feels like it's just impossibly beyond what our like capacity is. And that's only the case because we've indulged ourselves so highly in just immediately gratifying ourselves and never being in positions of discomfort, or never walking further or carrying more or whatever. And I just don't think that that's like a human experience. I think that's an experience of privilege that is now very apparent in the conversations around race, I think, that we're seeing, and also ethical business. Yeah, it's not that big a deal, is it? Like saying to yourself, maybe we will take 0.1% of our profits from last year and invest in recyclable packaging this year, like, and maybe that means our shareholders might see less returns on their investment. Is that really that harder thing to say?
I think it's the initial inertia, isn't it? It's getting over that hump of like that there is a change. You know, once the change is made and it's all happening, then more or less most people are kind of like, yeah, actually this is cool. You know, it's like when they started making you pay for carrier bags at supermarkets. You know, at first everyone was like, oh, this is you know, all this extra money is going to go to the supermarkets. It's disgraceful. But actually, when you got into it, you know, it's no problem now to take some extra carrier bags to the supermarket. You know, and it's that initial fear of change, maybe, or that initial fear of the discomfort, which is actually the problem. I think, you know, like, you know, people get, you say to some people about, I mean, giving women the vote people were terrified of women having the vote, because it could change the fabric of society as we know it. And it did, but it didn't ruin our lives. It didn't, actually made things better. And this is, I guess, this is the pain of progress. Is actually the fear of it is much worse than it actually is. And maybe it's that discomfort is something we need to get comfortable with. I mean, you as a business person, an entrepreneur, discomfort is actually something that is you have to deal with on a daily basis in order to find any kind of success and satisfaction. I guess that's where it lies. It's not easy setting up a shop and setting up an online business and writing articles for the Guardian and having a voice. It'd be much easier just to have a job and watch soap operas and do nothing, nothing else. But maybe that discomfort and that challenging ourselves is where the real growth and the benefit lies. I don't know. Maybe we need to get uncomfortable.
Absolutely. So about 4 years into the business, I like quite a clear routine in my kind of day-to-day life. And that was kind of wake up, walk 10, 15 meters, probably 50 meters, not 15 meters, to the shop, work for a day, come home, go to bed, watch soap operas, and like do the same day in, day out. And I was increasingly frustrated because I felt like I wasn't seeing enough growth in my personal life. And so I did an MBA at our local university, and it was like really difficult because I had to be surrounded by people come to the shop and they kind of already know us, so it's very easy. Much harder to be in rooms where you're a stranger. Really, really uncomfortable. And I realized then how easily I created a life that was was unchallenging to me in building a routine in my business. And I realized that the only way to combat that is to constantly challenge yourself to grow. And I think in doing that, you can build just more resiliency in discomfort. And that, I think, lends itself to lots of different reward, both personal and financial and whatever. I did it because I wanted to start a new business. So I wanted to kind of be an entrepreneur again. And I didn't feel confident in my innate abilities to do that. So I thought if I go out and I get a degree, then that will prove that I can do that thing. It's like, it was too expensive a way to have had that conversation with myself. I wish I had just got a journal or something, but yeah, I think now that I have done it, and now that I've practiced being uncomfortable and learning new things and being challenged and all of those things, now on the prospect of starting a new business, I feel just, much more kind of flexed. I feel like it's not challenging to ask for a conversation. It's not challenging to ask for investment. It's not challenging to admit that I don't know something, because I've been doing that all year at low stakes with this degree. So yeah, I would suggest to anybody kind of thinking about how they do the thing, they just have to practice doing something, and it might be the thing, or it could be a bunch of other stuff. But as long as they're kind of constantly pushing themselves to challenge their skill sets or their networks or, just their resiliency, then when they're ready to do their thing, they'll be in a much better position, I think.
There is a quote, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said, "Whoever does the thing has the power." And it's so true. I mean, just make decisions, do stuff, start things, just challenge yourself all the time. I mean, from the sounds of things, you don't make it easy for yourself at all. There was another business that you set up, which was the scarves from Ethiopia, where we were buying.
Yeah, that's my first business. Yeah.
And is that still going on? You still?
No, that business failed. So I always take comfort in that, because everybody has a business that fails. So I always feel like, at least mine's gone now. Mine's happened. That was one of the most challenging things I've ever done, because it was a poorly planned business. I see that now, but as my first business, I didn't have enough time to kind of just review its model. But we were operating as the manufacturer, the exporter, and the retailer of a product, and it doesn't work out in terms of efficiency in the slightest.
Yeah.
And it was really challenging. It was very personal, so we set up to essentially give one of my aunties a new source of income after she had become widowed, and we did really well for about 2 years. And we set up a production company, we set up an export company, we're able to train 4 weavers, we're able to like increase their income like 4 times, and we're able to give them a good kind of redundancy package as well. But and then they had their skills and entered the market as independent weavers to the market as opposed to our employees. So it was really, I think, well closed. But what one hopes from a business is that it would be operational for a while, and it just didn't add up. It costs a lot of money to operate.
Do you think the successful businesses they're built on the foundation of those businesses that didn't quite work out? Do you think you would be doing what you're doing now if it hadn't been for that one that had not quite worked out in the past?
No, I don't think so. I think I started that one for like really personal reasons, and in doing so I kind of learned some of the skills of business, which I then translated to Sancho's, and I hope future businesses that I start will build on that like knowledge and experience and just confidence to do something slightly different or something a bit more. I think also like failing at something teaches you a lot about yourself. It teaches you how to like forgive yourself, how to be honest to yourself and to others, and in that way you can't run any business without being easy on yourself, I think. And I guess something not working out puts you in a better position to do that. I just always hope that that's the only business that I've started that won't work out. That's my hope.
How do you deal with fear? Because a big thing that stops me doing absolutely anything is this fear. You've already seen one business not work out. There must be a sense that when you're starting anything, it might not work out. But then there's also this fear of kind of, what if I don't do it right, or what if I somehow cause harm somewhere, or what will people think? How do you deal with all this kind of this internal critic that is trying to stop you at every turn?
I think it's really important to try to specify some of the emotions that we have that feel very overwhelming, and to try to really kind of understand them. So for me, I fear failure a lot. This is one of the things that it makes me very socially conscious, and I criticize myself for lack of success. Like that's what I do. And for years I thought that was just an innate kind of part of my character. And then recently I've been networking more with and learning more from other first generation migrant like young people who are working, and their self-talk and their language and their problems. And I'm seeing that so much of that fear is rooted in my context of having kind of moved to the UK very young, with parents who had overcome a lot, who wanted a lot for me and my siblings. And I realized that that particular group of fears that can sometimes be crippling is contextual. And I think in doing that, I can kind of, be more aware of them and understand why they work. I also think another way to like really support yourself in dealing with these problems is asking yourself, at what point in time did that approach serve me?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of these things that are painful to us now, at some point in our lives, were useful, and it was how we, overcame something. And I think if you acknowledge that about even your work characteristics, I think you learn that, you can forgive yourself and you can change. Like, that's an option for you too. So I try to do that. And yeah, I think reflection is the other thing. It's my final thing, which is I try to think a lot about who I am and what I'm trying to do and why, and whether or not like the choices that I'm making align with that. Yeah. And if they don't, I know they're going to make me unhappy or uncomfortable or afraid. Yeah. And then I think the final thing I'll say on fear is, you've only got like one life, right? And it's okay to be afraid and do things anyway. Like, don't avoid fear, like avoid inertia, I think.
Yeah. Okay. It's that getting over that starting is the hardest part. And then when the ball is rolling, then, everything's, the fear is dealt with almost. So
yeah.
In terms of kind of moving towards wrapping things up, because I'm sure you've got better things to do. What's next? You're an entrepreneur. What's the next challenge? What's the next big thing you're going to move towards, do you think?
Do you watch Rick and Morty as well?
From time to time, I've seen a few, yeah.
Okay. There's an episode in the latest season, and the alien that's going to take over the world has they create apps. Okay. And so the whole joke is about this like terrible behavior of people creating apps as like sorry, it's a poor joke. I guess that if anyone's seen that, they might understand what I mean. Yeah. But I'm essentially developing an app. Yeah. Oh, I'm developing an app for the resale of fashion, and I'm really excited about it because I think one of the biggest reasons why there is an issue in fashion is that retailers and brands can only make money from the sale of new products, and I think this app will solve that problem. And I think I'm really excited. I'm also excited because it's a really different type of business to Sancho's, so it gets, I can like learn lots of different skills, and hopefully network in different ways, and I'm just excited about all the value that probably will create. That's what I'm doing at the moment. And writing as well.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate it. We've kind of run over a little bit, but I really appreciate your time. And what's the street address? So at the beginning, I got the location completely wrong of Sancho's. It's not Bristol, it's Exeter. What's the street address?
So it's 4th Street, Exeter. 117 4th Street, Exeter.
Fantastic. And it's sanchoshop.com and Wow Sancho on Instagram. And I'll put all these links on my website and on the show notes and everything like that as well. But thank you so much for today and for your energy and your thoughts and just helping me get my head a little bit around the problems that we have in our kind of the way we consume fashion at the moment and some of the other stuff that's going on at the moment as well. I really appreciate that. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate being able to speak.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so that was me talking to Kalkidan Legesse of Sancho's. If you want to find out more about Sancho's shop, it is literally www.sanchoshop.com, and on Instagram the handle is wowsancho. So I learned a lot about that. I think this podcast for me has been a call to action to go and educate myself and to stop putting the burden of educating me upon people who are going through this day to day, because we all have a responsibility to, find out what is going on with the world, where it's broken and where we can work to heal it. All right, so thank you for that. I've got another podcast coming up very soon where I'm talking about personal finance, which is a really important thing we need to learn about life, how to pay our way. So All right, enjoy this. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you learned a lot from it. I hope it's been useful. And we should all try and live a little bit more ethically, a bit more sustainably. Fashion has become disposable these days. So it's one area where I think we could all do better. All right, thanks a lot and see you soon. Cheers.